basically the core, when you talk about kind of working out and exercising, getting in shape, strengthen your core. I mean, China's core was strengthened by the last 5 years with Xi Jinping in power, and likely, but the next 5 years, and certainly in terms of the direction that the leader is taking the country, continuing reforms, continuing to open up capital markets, continuing to deregulate the foreign exchange market, continuing to boost consumption as an economic foundation, and stimulate rural development. All these things are on the agenda, but he also wants to strengthen the state-owned enterprises and strengthen kind of the state's grip on the economy, and in terms of restrictions on social order, for the internet, for example, particularly. So it's really interesting. The key comment, of course, in his speech was China's open door will not be closed. It will only be opened wider. We kind of believe that to a certain degree, at least on the business front. And it remains to be seen now. Doing some research on Mr. Xi is kind of interesting, because he's a child of the Mao movement. His father was one of the original founding members of the Chinese Communist Party with Mao Zedong. He was subsequently purged by the party in the 60s when there was a big upheaval within the party. Xi then spent time living in a re-indoctrination camp in a rural area, living in a cave, literally, and came out, as a legacy in the Communist Party, who worked his way up, got a chemical engineering degree, so he's obviously a smart guy. So it's kind of impressive, really, to check this guy out, even though he's a communist. I mean, not necessarily going to hold that against him in terms of his personal success in his own philosophies and mandate. And he's being compared to Mao Zedong already in the Chinese press. I mean, he has kind of revolutionized, almost the Ronald Reagan of China. Really interesting stuff, and something we're going to hear a lot more about. The 5 years we've seen already have brought exactly that: reforms, open markets, reduced corruption, but also a seriously tightened social dynamic, particularly in the most recent past here. Really in 2017, they've really clamped down in terms of the internet. He's tightened his grip on the political situation. You talk about how many members have been disciplined within the Communist Party. I mean, as many members have been disciplined in his rule as almost the entire 50, 60 years prior. So, he's a hardliner at the same time. So he kind of works all the angles seemingly pretty well. I have to say, I'm kind of impressed with this guy. We're bullish on China. We like the stock market. All of this plays right into our positions as far as we're concerned. The one thing to keep an eye on, though, is the deficit. The question is, can future growth outpace the rise in government spending? That's going to be a critical formula to see how that math plays out. Obviously, remains to be seen, but the deficit's pretty high, and it's grown a lot. And China's lost a lot of the flexibility they had 8 years ago. They've used that up, so they're becoming more in the danger zone, along with U.S. and Europe and Japan. Now, in terms of a major coup going on, in terms of China buying a piece of the Saudi state-owned oil company, okay, they're looking to get a 5% stake. The IPO, Saudi Arabia is offering this to the world, so the IPO thought to be coming in 2018. China's basically offered to buy the entire public block right now, right here, and in return has offered the Sauds a piece of Chinese refinery operations. It's going to be a difficult deal for the Sauds to turn down, I got to tell you. It really is. And to even further this, because it's really a power play by China, the world's largest importer and consumer of oil, to get the price of oil denominated in Chinese renminbi. And towards that end, they've opened a futures exchange that will trade crude oil priced in renminbi, and every barrel of crude will be backed by gold. It's, frankly, brilliant. Brilliant. It's going to work. And it's a question of how does this play out, how long does it take? But the idea here, is the bigger picture plan that we've been talking about, for the better part of since the early 90s. I mean, when China really kind of first devalued their currency, and all of a sudden we're in the picture on the global economy when they had never been before. One of the things we started saying then, one of the things we've been saying for 20 years, is watch out for a troika here in terms of kind of the triple threat to the U.S. and specifically to the dollar as the world's reserve currency. That's what's going on here. It's one of the biggest games in town. It is going to make a great book at some point and movie at some point. Some of what's going on right now in the background, in all the backroom dealings and all of the clandestine stuff that you know is going to be linked to something with this degree of importance for the global economy, for the U.S., for China, for OPEC, and in terms of the twists, okay, well, the first twist is China offers Saudi Arabia a piece of Chinese refinery operations. Okay, that's twist number one. Twist number two is, let's jump ahead here. I mean, where did the twist go? There we go. Twist number two is that the Russians would certainly be involved because Russia is China's largest single provider of oil. Russia at 1.55 million barrels a day. You have China at just over a million. And then you have Angola up there too, right around a million as well. I mean, Saudi Arabia at a million, and then Angola is like around, I think, like 1.3, 1.4. So those are the three biggest suppliers. But Russia's number one. So you're talking about OPEC, Russia, China, potentially getting together and deciding to trade crude oil in renminbi. This, to me, seems like it's going to happen. It almost makes too much sense not to happen. And it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, that the biggest risk to the U.S. and the biggest risk to the dollar is a kind of a powwow and a tie-in between Russia, China, and OPEC as it relates to oil and petrodollars. And that's exactly what's brewing, if you ask me. So where's the price of renminbi crude right now? Well, this is why China's buying so much. So much. I mean, they are buying hand over fist. And the reason is, in renminbi terms, because of the rally in the renminbi against the dollar, the price of Chinese crude oil is still pretty low. So they're packing it into the strategic petroleum reserves in China. So they're buying it for strategic reserves, too. I mean, the Chinese have always been, as long as I've been in this business, since the early 80s, the Chinese have always been very astute traders. They absolutely know what they're doing. They have a history of thousands of years of trading silk, with Marco Polo. I mean, it's not to be minimized or dismissed. They're really good traders, and for them to be buying here, you can see why. The longer term dynamic is prices are low here, and they're not likely to stay here. You see kind of the way the rate of change is starting to rev up in the shorter term relative to the longer term as it relates to renminbi crude oil. Okay, total imports 9 million barrels a day. You had refineries back online. Their seasonal shutdown for maintenance is over. Okay, supplies from Saudi Arabia up 9.6%. And by the way, that's the second highest import total ever into China. The numbers for September that we got last week. Saudi Arabia up 9.6% year over year. Now that's what we're talking about Russia. Here's your twist. Russia's in play. They're up 60% year over year. I mean, China's going crazy importing crude from everywhere they can get their hands on it. The twist that few were expecting, though, was that Iran is your wild card. Iran is your joker in the deck here and could be played. Iranian exports to China are now at 700, almost 800,000 barrels a day, and are up 59% from a year ago. I mean, wow. China has a seemingly insatiable demand for oil and is basically taking it from anyone that'll ship it to them, including the U.S. I mean, U.S. shipments of crude oil to China are up 260% year over year, primarily because they just started. But at 120,000 barrels a day, I mean, that's almost 1.25 of U.S. output going to China. So if we're so worried about this, why are we sending oil to China? I'm not saying we shouldn't. I mean, it's free trade. Of course we should. But, this is a serious dynamic that's going to get only more intense. China really looks impressive right here in terms of kind of relative to the U.S. And pardon my French, for having their shit together when the U.S. is a mess politically.